The Senate chamber buzzed with the restless hum of anticipation, its marble floors echoing with the shuffle of staffers and the clicking of reporters' cameras. This wasn't just another policy hearing, it was a collision course between two very different worldviews. At the center of it all sat Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, leaning back in his chair with that trademark mix of mischief and steel in his eyes. Across from him, prepared with neatly stacked notes and an air of authority, was Federal Reserve Governor Lisa D. Cook, a woman who had spent years cultivating her reputation as both an academic heavyweight and a defender of progressive economic theory. But today, Kennedy wasn't interested in flattery, credentials, or carefully rehearsed lines. He was interested in truth, and he had no intention of letting Cook glide past with polished jargon and theories that sounded good in textbooks but fell flat in the lives of everyday Americans. The cameras zoomed in as the chair recognized Senator Kennedy for his line of questioning. He didn't look at his papers. He didn't need to. Instead, he clasped his hands on the table, leaned forward slightly, and delivered his opening volley with that southern drawl that managed to cut sharper than a scalpel. Professor Cook, you've told this committee more than once that your policies, your theories, your so-called frameworks will stabilize the economy and protect working Americans. But I've got to ask, how many times do you have to be wrong before you admit the theory's busted? Gasps rippled across the chamber. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching furiously. Cook shifted in her seat, her composure tested in real time. She adjusted her glasses, took a breath, and tried to answer in a calm, professorial tone, citing models, projections, and long-term outcomes. But Kennedy didn't let her off the hook. He interrupted with a sharp wave of his hand. No, ma'am. I'm not asking about models. I'm asking about people, real people who can't buy eggs without checking the price twice. You call that stability? The room went silent, every eye glued to the exchange. In that moment, it was clear, this wasn't going to be a routine Senate hearing. It was going to be a showdown. Lisa D. Cook straightened in her chair, gripping the edges of her notes as though the paper itself could anchor her. She spoke in a steady, measured tone, Senator, economics is not about single moments, it's about trends. Yes, there are hardships today, but if we stay the course, these policies will deliver stability in the long run. Her words floated across the chamber, polished but detached, the kind of rhetoric that sounded rehearsed in university lecture halls but hollow in the ears of struggling families. Kennedy let her finish, then leaned forward, his voice low but sharp, carrying the cadence of a man who'd spent his life cutting through nonsense. Ma'am, with all due respect, he drawled, if the long run means people can't afford groceries in the short run, then your theory ain't worth a hill of beans. Folks can't eat long-run stability. They need relief now. The chamber stirred. Several senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Staffers traded nervous glances. Reporters' fingers danced furiously over keyboards. Kennedy's words weren't just a critique of Cook's testimony, they were a gut punch to the entire framework of progressive economic thought she carried into the room. Cook tried to regain ground, citing inflation indices, employment data, and monetary policy. But Kennedy's drawl cut through again, his tone deceptively calm. You keep telling us the numbers say we're on track. But let me tell you, numbers don't stand in line at the gas station. Numbers don't skip meals to pay rent. People do. And I've yet to hear you explain why the people I represent are worse off now than they were before these solutions of yours. The room went still. Kennedy's point hit like a thunderclap. Cook opened her mouth to respond but paused, her practiced calm cracking ever so slightly. The camera lenses zoomed closer, capturing every flicker of unease. It was clear this wasn't just a policy debate, it was a battle of realities, Cook's theoretical models against Kennedy's hard-hitting anecdotes of real lives under strain. And in that moment, the weight of the room tilted toward Kennedy. Lisa D. Cook inhaled sharply, her hands tightening around her notes. She had walked into the Senate chamber expecting tough questions, but not this kind of blow. Kennedy's words weren't academic sparring, they were the kind of sharp truths that landed straight in the gut of anyone watching from home. She steadied herself and replied, Senator, I respect your concern for your constituents. But economics isn't just about one community, it's about national balance. Sometimes, we must endure temporary hardship for greater long-term gain. These policies are designed to reduce inequality, create jobs, and ultimately build a stronger foundation. It was polished, it was safe. And it fell flat. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised, as though he'd just heard the same canned line for the 1,000th time. His drawl carried across the room, dripping with irony. Temporary hardship? Folks back home don't call it temporary, Professor. They call it living paycheck to paycheck, wondering whether to buy gas or groceries. And if this is the stronger foundation you're talking about, it's got more cracks than the sidewalk in front of the Capitol. A ripple of laughter rolled through the chamber, small, nervous, but undeniable. Reporters' heads snapped up. The moment was catching fire. Cook's eyes flashed with frustration. She fired back, Senator, dismissing data because it doesn't fit your anecdotes is dangerous. We cannot govern on feelings alone. Kennedy sat up straighter, his voice now cutting like a blade. Feelings? Ma'am, when a mom tells me she skips dinner so her kids can eat, that's not a feeling, that's a fact. You can pile up your spreadsheets till the roof caves in, but until you can explain why policies that were supposed to help are hurting families, you're just telling stories with numbers. The chamber froze. Even the usual hum of side chatter died out. Kennedy had flipped the script, reframing Cook's entire defense as detached theory, while painting himself as the voice of lived reality. Cameras zoomed in. Cook adjusted her glasses, but her silence stretched long enough to become its own headline. Kennedy didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply leaned back, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. It was a silence so sharp, it echoed louder than any applause. Lisa Cook's silence didn't last long. She straightened her back, adjusted the microphone, and forced her voice to steady itself. Senator, with all due respect, anecdotes can be powerful, but they do not solve structural problems. If we want to lift families out of poverty, we have to tackle systemic issues, education access, wage stagnation, healthcare costs. These policies may not deliver instant relief, but they lay the groundwork for long-term prosperity. It was a good recovery, measured, confident, built on the kind of textbook arguments that won her applause in academic circles. But this wasn't a classroom. This was the U.S. Senate, and John Kennedy wasn't grading her thesis, he was fighting for political oxygen. Kennedy leaned forward, his glasses sliding down his nose just enough for him to peer over them, his voice dipped in sarcasm but sharpened like steel. Professor, with all due respect right back at you, that sounds like telling a drowning man he just needs to learn how to swim faster. Folks can't buy groceries on promises of long-term prosperity. They need relief today. Tomorrow's theories don't put food on the table tonight. The words landed like a thunderclap. A murmur ran through the chamber. Even those who disagreed with Kennedy couldn't ignore the punch his analogy packed. He had translated policy jargon into something every viewer watching at home could feel in their gut. Cook pressed on, refusing to let him have the last word. And yet, Senator, ignoring structural issues is exactly why we're in this mess. Short-term fixes may win applause, but they don't solve the underlying problems. We need discipline, not theatrics. That word, theatrics, hung in the air. Kennedy tilted his head, eyes narrowing, as if she had just dared him to swing harder. He leaned closer to the mic, and his tone shifted, less mocking now, more deadly calm. Ma'am, if speaking up for the single mom who can't afford eggs is theatrics, then guilty as charged. But let me remind you, Washington's so-called discipline is what dug this hole in the first place. You can call it structural. I call it broken. And broken systems don't need more theory. They need fixing. The chamber crackled with energy. A few gasps. Some light clapping from the back rows. The tension was climbing toward something bigger, something explosive. Cook bit her lip, searching her notes for footing. Kennedy just sat back, letting the silence work for him again. He had turned her own word, theatrics, into a badge of honor. And the crowd was starting to feel it. The air in the chamber was thick now, every eye locked on the back and forth like it was a high-stakes prize fight. Lisa Cook tried to steady herself, flipping through her notes for a statistic or model that could blunt Kennedy's momentum. But Kennedy wasn't about to give her that chance. He leaned in, lowering his voice to the kind of quiet steel that makes people lean forward in their seats. "Professor," he began, "let me tell you about a man named Hank from Baton Rouge. Hank's worked construction for 30 years. He doesn't complain. He just works hard, pays his taxes, and tries to give his kids a better life. But last month, he told me he had to choose between fixing the brakes on his truck or paying his electric bill. Now, you can throw all the charts and forecasts you want at me, but explain to Hank how your temporary hardship makes sense when he's got to drive to work on broken brakes." The room froze. Kennedy had just put a face, a father, a worker, a neighbor, on the abstract suffering Cook had tried to reduce to numbers. And the impact was undeniable. Cook opened her mouth, fumbling for an answer. "Senator, I can't speak to individual cases." Kennedy cut in, his tone sharp but steady. "That's the problem, ma'am. You call them individual cases. I call them Americans, thousands of them. Millions of them. You keep talking like they're statistics, and that's why folks don't trust Washington anymore." The audience behind the press bench stirred, a wave of nods and murmurs rolling through. Even some of Cook's allies shifted uneasily. Her academic armor was no match for Kennedy's weapon of choice, the plain, unvarnished stories of everyday people. Cook tried again, appealing to policy, "We are building structures to prevent future harm." But Kennedy leaned in closer, delivering the line that sliced through the chamber like a blade. "Future harm? Hank's living in harm right now. The future won't matter to him if he doesn't survive the present." Silence. Then, a smattering of applause, rare in such a setting, broke out from the back. The gavel banged for order, but the message had already landed. Kennedy wasn't just debating economics anymore, he was cornering Cook with a reality she couldn't sidestep. Lisa Cook's voice wavered for the first time. She shuffled her papers, clearly rattled by Kennedy's relentless storytelling. "Senator, anecdotal cases are important, but we must also look at the broader picture. The economy, by many measures, is improving. Unemployment is down, wages are rising. Inflation, though high, is moderating. We have to trust the system." Kennedy snapped his head up, his tone sharp as a whip. "Trust the system, ma'am, that's exactly what Hank did. That's what Mary, the widow in Shreveport, did when she trusted Washington to help with healthcare costs. That's what college graduates did when they borrowed under your so-called opportunity plans and now drown in debt. The system you're defending is the one failing them. Why in heaven's name should they trust it now?" Gasps echoed through the chamber. A senator on the Democratic bench leaned back, clearly uncomfortable. Staffers scribbled notes furiously, knowing they were watching a moment that would go viral within hours. Cook, visibly tense, tried to pivot. "If we undermine confidence in institutions, we create chaos. Economic systems rely on belief." Kennedy leaned in, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Belief? Belief doesn't pay the bills. Belief doesn't put food on the table. Belief doesn't keep the lights on when the power company sends a shut-off notice. You've built a tower of theories on the back of belief, and folks out there are being crushed under it." The words landed heavy, reporters glanced at one another. Even the stenographers paused for a heartbeat. Cook's face tightened. She attempted to fire back, "Senator, without stability, we risk a collapse far greater than any hardship we see now." Kennedy raised a finger, stopping her mid-sentence. His voice cracked like thunder. "Ma'am, you call this stability? When families are skipping meals, when small businesses are shutting down, when gas is so high folks carpool to buy bread? If this is stability, I'd hate to see collapse." The room erupted in a wave of murmurs, some even clapping before the gavel banged again for silence. Kennedy sat back, his point made, his drawl carrying the quiet weight of finality. Cook's defenses were slipping, her polished rhetoric sounding weaker with every sentence. The clash was no longer theory versus anecdotes. It had become something rawer, truth versus pretense. The chamber felt like a courtroom where the jury had already made up its mind. Lisa Cook shuffled her papers again, her voice thinner now, almost pleading. "Senator, I understand your passion, but policy requires patience. Quick fixes are reckless. If we abandon structure for short-term relief, we could plunge into worse instability." Kennedy leaned forward, eyes locked on hers, his drawl smooth but laced with steel. "Professor, you keep talking about patience like folks out there have time to wait. Patience doesn't keep the heat on in January. Patience doesn't pay the farmer when fertilizer costs have doubled. Patience won't put food in a child's lunchbox. So I'll ask again, how many families have to break before your theory bends?" The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Cook's lips parted, but no words came. She glanced down at her notes as if the answer might be hiding in the margins, but the papers offered no lifeline. Kennedy pressed the advantage, his voice rising just enough to fill the chamber. "You want Americans to trust a system that tells them suffering is just part of the plan. That's not stability, it's cruelty with a bow on it. You can wrap it in data, you can dress it up in academic language, but at the end of the day, folks know when they're being sold a fairy tale. And right now, your fairy tale has turned into their nightmare." The crowd behind the press gallery stirred, some nodding, others whispering. Even senators who usually tuned out these hearings leaned in, their faces betraying the impact. Cook tried to muster a defense, but her voice faltered. "Senator, if we don't manage expectations, the alternative is..." Kennedy cut her off, his words slamming down like a gavel. "The alternative, Professor, is honesty. And maybe that's the one currency Washington forgot how to spend." The chamber erupted in gasps and low applause, the kind that gavel strikes couldn't immediately silence. For the first time, Lisa Cook looked less like an expert and more like someone cornered by the very truth she couldn't escape. By now, the air inside the chamber felt like it could snap. Lisa Cook's shoulders tightened, her carefully cultivated calm unraveling thread by thread. She raised her voice, hoping to reclaim authority. "Senator Kennedy, your rhetoric may play well to the cameras, but policy cannot be reduced to soundbites. We are not here to trade stories, we are here to govern responsibly. If we abandon long-term strategies for quick applause lines, we will doom this nation's economy." It was a defiant stand, bold on the surface, but her words carried the faint tremor of someone grasping at control. Kennedy didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He slowly removed his glasses, folded them neatly, and set them on the table. When he spoke, his voice had that dangerous quiet that draws every ear closer. "Ma'am," he said, "the only thing doomed is the family that can't afford to heat their home tonight. The only thing doomed is the small-town diner that's shutting its doors because eggs cost more than steak. You want to talk about responsibility? Responsibility is looking that family in the eye and telling them the truth. And the truth is, your long-term strategies are crushing them in the here and now." The chamber stirred again. This wasn't Kennedy grandstanding, it was Kennedy stripping the polish off Cook's arguments and holding up the raw edges for everyone to see. Cook tried to pivot back to numbers, citing the Federal Reserve's mandate and pointing to projections. But Kennedy leaned forward, his finger tapping the desk with each word. "You keep saying, trust the process. Well, tell me this, if the process is so brilliant, why is Main Street bleeding while Wall Street gets richer? Why are my folks back home paying twice as much for gas while billion-dollar corporations keep padding their bonuses?" Gasps echoed through the room. Cook froze. The cameras caught it, her jaw tightened, her lips pressed thin, her eyes darting like someone caught in the glare of a spotlight with nowhere to run. Kennedy let the silence linger, his gaze unrelenting. Finally, he delivered the line that sealed the moment. "Professor, you don't have an economic plan, you've got a theory on paper. And when theory meets reality, reality wins every single time." The chamber erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Some senators shook their heads, others sat in stunned silence. Cook had walked in with charts and confidence. Now, she was clinging to fragments of both. The chamber had grown eerily quiet, the kind of silence that signals something irreversible is about to happen. Lisa Cook's fingers tightened on the microphone base, her voice clipped with frustration. "Senator, with all due respect, if you dismiss data, models, and institutions, then you dismiss the very tools we rely on to guide this nation. Without them, we are left with chaos, fear, and demagoguery." Her words echoed like a warning shot, but Kennedy didn't flinch. He sat still for a moment, glasses off, his hand resting flat on the desk as though bracing the weight of the whole chamber. Then he leaned forward, his voice low, steady, and unrelenting. "Ma'am, let me tell you what chaos looks like. Chaos is a single mother in Shreveport working 2 jobs and still not able to pay for groceries. Chaos is a veteran in Lafayette who gave everything for this country but can't afford his prescriptions. Chaos is small businesses shuttered on Main Street because they can't keep up with costs your policies helped inflate. That's not demagoguery, Professor. That's America today." A ripple moved through the room. The press gallery scribbled furiously, cameras zooming closer to Kennedy's face. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't grandstanding. He was cutting with surgical precision, every word layered with the gravity of lived experience. Cook tried to interrupt. "Senator, respectfully." Kennedy raised a hand, silencing her. His tone sharpened, each syllable deliberate. "You call me reckless for questioning your theories. But let me ask you this, what's more reckless, challenging failed models, or doubling down while Americans bleed under them? You talk about patience, about trust in the system. Well, the system's been cashing checks it can't cover, and the American people are the ones paying the overdraft fees." The chamber broke into murmurs, senators shifting, staffers whispering. Some in the back clapped before the gavel hammered down for order. Cook sat frozen, her face pale, her notes forgotten. The spotlight no longer highlighted her expertise, it exposed her isolation. Kennedy had seized control of the narrative, framing her as the guardian of failed theory against the raw, undeniable truth of struggling citizens. And in that silence, thick as stone, the question wasn't whether Cook could recover, it was whether the chamber itself would ever look at her the same way again. The Senate chamber was now a theater of silence, every cough, every shuffle swallowed up by the weight of what had just unfolded. Lisa Cook sat frozen, her earlier confidence shattered, her stack of notes limp in her hands. She had entered the room as an expert, armed with data and credentials, but Kennedy had stripped it all bare, leaving only the raw tension of a people's struggle against polished theory. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate, every syllable striking like a hammer. "Professor, you keep saying Americans need to trust the system. But let me leave you with this, the system was supposed to serve the people, not the other way around. And if you think they're going to sit quietly while Washington tells them suffering is just part of the plan, you're in for a rude awakening." Cook's lips trembled, but no sound came. The cameras caught it all, the flicker of defeat in her eyes, the subtle slump of her shoulders, the weight of being cornered not by partisanship, but by a truth too sharp to dodge. Kennedy didn't smile. He didn't gloat. Instead, he straightened his notes, slipped his glasses back on, and delivered the final blow, his voice resonating across the chamber like a closing verdict. "Numbers don't put food on the table. Policies don't keep the lights on. Theories don't raise a child. People do. And if Washington forgets that, then maybe it's time the American people reminded us who we really work for." For a moment, there was nothing. No cough, no shuffle, no whisper. Just silence, the kind that carries more power than any applause. Then, slowly at first, came the sound of clapping from the gallery. It built, spreading across the room like a rising tide, until even the gavel's pounding couldn't drown it out. Lisa Cook sat motionless, her arguments drowned not by volume, but by clarity. Kennedy had not just won the exchange, he had seized the narrative, shaping it into a reminder that Washington's ivory towers crumble when pressed against the weight of everyday reality. And as the applause echoed, the cameras locked onto Kennedy's face, calm, unyielding, and carved with the quiet confidence of a man who had just spoken a truth no one in that chamber could ignore. Washington can drown in charts and theories all it wants, but truth is simple: families are hurting now. And if leaders can't face that, they don't deserve the people's trust. Kennedy reminded them tonight, reality beats rhetoric every single time.